Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson as we continue our coverage into the race for Utah's United States Senate seat. We have had the privilege of having a number of candidates on, and today we're really pleased to have joining us former Speaker of the House of Representatives here in the state of Utah, Brad Wilson. And I still call you Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to the show.
It is so good to be with you. How are you today, Boyd?
I'm doing well. The sun is out, and at least a little promise of spring is on the horizon. And March Madness is not quite over, so we're doing pretty good in that category. You've been out there on the campaign trail and working your way through this whole process, which, of course, there'll be a convention coming up, a primary in June, and then, of course, the general election will be the first Tuesday of November. As you've been going through this, you know your way around the politics of this state in a significant way. What have you learned this time around going at it from a federal seat as opposed to a state legislative seat?
Well, thanks again for having me on. And it is very different, Boyd, to be talking to Utahns about how Salt Lake or Utah is governed versus how Washington, D.C. is governed. And what I have found, which probably won't be a big surprise to you, is that people in Utah are very proud of this state. They understand Utah is the best managed state in the country. It's a great place to live, great place to raise a family. And they're in general pretty happy with the way Utah's got things going. But when they look to D.C., they see a dumpster fire. And they in one way, shape, or form have said to me all over the state, Brad, when you get back to Washington, D.C., could you make it look a little bit more like Utah? And I think rightfully so.
Yeah, and as we look at that, we often tout that Utah model of how the legislature works, how budgets get balanced, and accountability and transparency, and those things are so crucial. Give us a sense of that. Project forward if everything tilts your way as you go through this race. What would that look like with a Senator Brad Wilson back in our nation's capital? What do those early days look like in terms of your interaction with your colleagues and taking that Utah model to D.C.?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, what I look forward to is being back in Washington, D.C., and taking the issues that we have here in the state of Utah that I understand well, from whether it's the Wasatch Front or our rural communities, and serving Utahns back there. They would, of course, like someone to go back and help get the fiscal problems of Washington, D.C. back in line. And this spending that's caused all this inflation that every Utahn is feeling is really hurting. It's hurting Utah families. It's hurting Utah businesses. And what's interesting is as I go around the state and I say, hey, not only did we balance our budget here in Utah, but we had, while I was Speaker of the House, record tax cuts year after year after year, giving Utahns an ability to keep more of their own money in their own pocket. They're like, well, how did you do that? And we talked through, well, it's a matter of making hard decisions. And Boyd, you know that hard decisions don't have to be made in Washington, D.C. They can just print money all day long, which is what they're doing. There's no mechanism that forces a balanced budget, which we have here, but we didn't have to cut taxes here every year, but we balanced the budget and cut taxes. And that's the kind of leadership that I think people in Utah want to see go back to Washington.
Yeah, we always talk about the fact that the math always wins, and there is the absolute predictability of consequences. And when you actually have that accountability year after year, it tends to do a little better than when you can kick the can, or as we're currently doing it, kicking two cans down the road, funding the government just kind of becomes perpetual. I wanted to get your insight in terms of some of the conversations you're having around the state. What has surprised you, or what have you learned from the people of the state of Utah as you've been campaigning this round?
Yeah, there have been some surprises. I think that it's surprised me that wherever I go, I thought the border would be more of an issue in the rural areas and on areas maybe adjacent to I-15. But the border and the lack of a border, I mean, to call it a border right now is probably being generous. the lack of a border is causing frustration and concern all over the state. And people are angry about it. They want to see it fixed, and it doesn't matter where you go. And I say that because I thought that a lot of the issues would be more regional, and they're really not. Even on the Wasatch Front, the people that I'm talking with, the voters that I'm talking with, are frustrated with public lands and how out of touch Washington seems to be with multiple use of public lands and the implications for these decisions that are being made back in Washington, and how they're affecting Utahns' lives here everywhere. And so it's in some ways comforting. It makes your job a little bit easier as a U.S. Senator if you don't have, really significant differences of opinions on some of the big issues. There are nuanced issues across the state, like water, for example. And Boyd, you and I have talked about water a lot. While I was Speaker of the House, there's probably no issue I worked on more than water. And I think I'm uniquely qualified, actually, when I get back to D.C. to help address this issue. And the water solutions and challenges are very different in Washington County than they are in Weber County. But what people tell me wherever I go is, Brad, when you get back to Washington, we need you to help with these water issues. Even though the state's had record amounts of investment in conservation and record amounts of investment in water resources, they know that these issues around water for Utah can't be solved just inside the borders of our state. And we need our federal delegation to be able to lean into this issue in ways that they haven't in the past to help solve it.
Yeah. Final question for you, and this is the question I asked every candidate, from those running for president down to the mayors and the city council. And you know this from experience. You got the scar tissue to prove it. Campaigns are rough and tumble. They're exhausting. They're exasperating. They're all the things on family and work and everything in between. What will make all of this worth it? We know everybody's in it to win it, so we'll establish that as the ground rules. But the question is, what would make all of this worth it? All of the headache and the heartache and all of that, what would make all of that worth it for you, even if you got to that first Tuesday in November and came up a little short?
Well, if I felt like, and this is what I hope to do, and I'm in Washington, D.C., Boyd, but Utahns need to feel like they're being heard and represented in Washington, D.C., not having Washington, D.C. being represented to them. And I really want Utahns to feel like they've got a strong voice in Washington.
Yeah, great perspective. Former Speaker of the House, Brad Wilson, running for the United States Senate, seat currently occupied by Senator Mitt Romney, junior senator from the state. And we know this is a long, hard process, and we know you're running and gunning out there on the campaign trail. But, Brad, we appreciate you joining us on Inside Sources. I'm sure we will talk again as this marches on, and good luck to you out on the trail.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Boyd.
All right, that's former Speaker of the House, Brad Wilson, joining us on the line today. And